Speaking of services and customs and sanctuaries and celebrations, many of you know that to be granted an aliyah in the service for the reading of Torah on a Shabbat morning is a great honor. Tomorrow morning, for example, Jesse and Shane will honor their grandparents with this role in the service as a sign of their love and respect. Being selected to say the blessings before and after the Torah reading is understood as a recognition of one's character and the congregation's desire to acknowledge you in public. Now, over the years, receiving aliyot for some Torah portions has been seen as being something of a greater honor than receiving the aliyot for others. Torah portions that felt to a community as being more significant or more meaningful, those that were considered uniquely important, were sometimes reserved for especially prestigious members of the community. When we read the Ten Commandments, for example, or when we hear the story of the parting of the Red Sea, those have sometimes been seen as especially meaningful and honorable times to have an aliyah in your synagogue. Now, during the Middle Ages especially, there were certain superstitions that arose from the practice of awarding certain people the opportunity to say the blessings for certain readings from the Torah. Some people would be especially eager to receive an aliyah for a section in which God promises a character to be blessed with prosperity, for example, or rewarded with success or status or peace. Sometimes those who were childless would vie for the opportunity to get an aliyah for a Torah portion in which God allowed a couple to conceive a baby. Those who were scholars longed to be granted an aliyah for a parsha that contains especially important or profound laws or teachings. And the opposite was also true as well, which brings us to our portion for this Shabbat. In the Middle Ages, receiving an aliyah for this week's portion in particular was seen as a somewhat dubious honor. I'm sorry to be telling you this just now, but because while this week's Torah portion, which is called Kitavo, does contain a few blessings that God is promising to the Israelites, what it contains much more of is a long and elaborate set of curses. And yes, and the curses in this week's parsha are not your average, everyday, garden variety biblical curses. These are really, really bad ones that the Israelites are threatened with in order to encourage them toward good behavior. God threatens that their fields will be ruined and their cities demolished. God warns them of financial ruin and tragic bereavement, blighted crops and sickly livestock, physical infirmity and strife in their families. The curses are plentiful and they are chilling. So over time, in the Jewish communities of medieval Europe, people grew more and more superstitious about this portion, and eventually, even when they were invited by a beloved rabbi or cantor to receive the honor of having an aliyah for this Shabbat, people began to say no. And so the rabbis had to come up with certain innovative remedies to deal with this unique situation. So one custom that arose was to have the cantor, or whoever was reading the portion from this Shabbat, to have them read the section of those horrible curses in a very quiet voice. That way, the community reasoned, they wouldn't attract the attention of the evil spirits, and the person getting the aliyah would stay safe. Then another custom came about, which was that when everyone else refused the honor, they should just make the rabbi do it. So obviously I'm not a big fan of that plan either, but the one that I want to share with you tonight is the one that I love the most. It was the invention of a rabbi named Yuspa Shamus, who led a small synagogue in Bavaria in the 1600s. He ruled as follows. In order to encourage someone who's reluctant to take the aliyah on Shabbat Kitavo, we offer him a package deal. If you'll be brave enough to take the aliyah this Shabbat, you will be rewarded by also being called up for the aliyah on Rosh Hashanah morning, which is one of the holiest times of the year, one of the most prestigious honors that a synagogue can bestow on a person. Rabbi Shamus explained that his reasoning was this. A person who is willing to endure the curses will also, in time, merit to enjoy the blessings. I find that incredibly touching. I find it very comforting, even and especially when I find myself making my way unsteadily through times of struggle and difficulty. If you're willing to endure the curses, you will in time deserve the blessings. Do things always work out that way? Certainly not. Is there unthinkable suffering in the world that's never followed by any kind of reward? Yes, of course. To think otherwise is either to be naive or callous. But I cannot help but being moved by that beautiful teaching. It's like that remarkable perspective from the Psalms, which assures us that the one who sows in tears will reap in joy. The psalmist isn't suggesting that trouble and difficulty magically transform into pleasure, or that painful circumstances automatically turn into good ones, even though that does sometimes happen too. What he's saying instead is that coded in the essence of ourselves, in the deep structure of our human lives, is the capacity that we may yet be moved beyond trouble and pain into comfort and gratitude. To turn from a person who sows in tears into one who reaps in joy is what happens when we find ourselves able to see beyond the struggles of the past and begin imagining ourselves renewed. About 100 times a year, we revisit the dramatic recurring theme of Jewish history. Once we were slaves, now we are free. We have in the past been enslaved by negative patterns of behavior, toxic relationships, unhealthy relationships, addictions, relationships with people or with food, with drugs or sex or money. But all along, even through those struggles, we have held inside ourselves the capacity to become free. We can see our way toward freedom from the things that bound us. What Rabbi Shammos saw in the 17th century was that being willing to sit calmly and patiently, even with those biblical curses raining all around you, that is the skill that qualifies you for the Aliyah on Rosh Hashanah, the time of great renewal and possibility. Because you have endured the experience of sowing in tears, you merit the honor and the reward of reaping your produce in joy. There's a practice in Jewish tradition you may be aware of for someone who's recovered from a serious illness or survived a dangerous accident, or someone who's made their way through a treacherous situation. The custom is that that person recites a special blessing called Birkat HaGomel. It's a special blessing of gratitude and indebtedness, acknowledgement to God. The person reciting this blessing expresses their thanks to God, expresses a hope that God will continue to look after them. And traditionally, after one recites Birkat HaGomel, it's customary to go out and give tzedakah, to find a cause or an individual to give charity to as a show of gratitude for having survived a difficult experience. Now, here's a theological question. Why does it make sense for us to have a special blessing for having gotten sick and then gotten better? Wouldn't it have been nicer for God to have never allowed us to get sick in the first place? Why should there be such a big, dramatic blessing for getting sick and then getting healthy? Shouldn't the biggest blessing of all be reserved for someone who has always been healthy? Why do we make a bigger deal about getting better than staying healthy? Why? Because getting better is the thing that makes us see and acknowledge how blessed we were even when we didn't know it. Because even the most spiritually enlightened among us don't go around through the world every day steeped in gratitude for having stayed healthy. But if you've gotten sick and then gotten better, if you've been injured and then found yourself healed, when you narrowly escape calamity, then you know real gratitude. Then you know real appreciation for the most mundane things of everyday life. The ability to walk, the ability to talk, to see and to hear, to speak. And then you translate that gratitude, God willing, into charitable generosity. Why? Because that sudden awakening awareness of how lucky, how blessed, how fortunate you are should in the end inspire you to bring about wholeness and blessing for others. Classic Jewish teaching from Pirkei Avot reminds us that the only person who can truly be considered wealthy is a person who rejoices in his own lot, who is happy with what he has, who is satisfied with what he already possesses, no matter how much or how little, rather than obsessing over his desires that remain unfulfilled. Our moral tradition cautions us against ever believing that the blessings and assets we enjoy are ours only because we deserve them, rather than cultivating a sense of gratitude, which will then motivate us to share our blessings with others. So to conclude, in Rabbi Shamus's little synagogue, in his little Stiebele in Bavaria, there was a special Mishaberach that was customary to have been recited for that person who accepted the honor of the Aliyah on Shabbat Kitzavo, the one for the recitation of the curses and the warnings and the terror that God held out. And that special Mishaberach ends this way. May it be God's will that the curses will be transformed into blessings. Let this be your will, O God. I know that at some time or another, all of us have found ourselves sowing in tears. At some time or another, we've been grateful and delighted to reap the fruits of joy. I know that many of us have been moved by times when what we thought was a terrible curse was somehow transmuted into an unexpected blessing. And I know also that some of us are still in the land of curses. Some of us still waiting to be released. The spirit of this month of Elul, this time of profound and bracing spiritual preparation, and the coming approach of the High Holy Days comes to remind us that just by being human, we are capable of great change. We are able to imagine and make real previously unimaginable transformation in which the mistakes and the flaws of the past can give way to a wholly renewed future. We are, all of us, capable of boundless learning and growth in a world in which every curse is transformed to blessing. Though all of us this year have had times of sowing in tears, let us in the year ahead find many more opportunities to reap in joy. Shabbat Shalom, everybody. Shabbat Shalom.